Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talking. You know, I've been writing and talking a lot lately about the North Dakota Republican Party reorganizing, and that's going to be happening this weekend. We talked about it at length on the last show. This weekend's going to be a consequential thing. The North Dakota Republican Party is the dominant political organization in our state, and there may be a very sharp change in what the leadership of the party looks like happening this weekend. But the other, North Dakota's other political party, or not the only one, but the Democratic-NPL, they've already reorganized. They already have a new leader. His name's Adam Goldwyn, and he joins this episode of Plain Talk along with my co-host, Ben Hanson. Adam, how you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Give us a little bit of your background. Where'd you start in politics? How'd you get involved in politics? Tell us about yourself.
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon. I've always been from a political family. There's a photo of my older brother when he was 7 months old in the campaign office of the then governor candidate. My mom was working as the treasurer. So there's a funny letter from John Updike to my great-grandmother saying, keep up the good work as a suffragette in Helena, Montana. So I come from a long, and that was, 1910, 1920, something like that. So it was always in my family, always in our mind to be, trying to help working people, trying to help immigrants, trying to help, anybody try to fulfill their American dream. Myself, I got my start. I moved to Fargo in 2014, January I'm a professor of English at North Dakota State University. And so I just started looking around at the state of public education in the state and started to see the broken dreams of our students who, because of the political system and because of the way that the economy was shifted towards oil extraction and that money was being sent mostly out of the state, the way that the sort of social policies of the Republican supermajority were really just driving young people out of the state and taking away their dreams. And so that sort of motivated me to get started. I am still the chair of the District 11 Democrats at Fargo. And so I've just sort of become more and more involved in the party from there.
Adam, can you describe, most folks don't ever consider becoming district chair, let alone a statewide political party chair. They might really not know what that is. They might see the title on a CNN interview, or in our case, we might see something on the forum here with an individual quote, but you don't know too much about the person. And we here on Plain Talk kind of fancy ourselves as an In the Weeds podcast. Could you let folks know, you've been chair now for, I believe, a short time. Is that correct?
Of the state party?
Yes.
Yes, I was elected state party chair. I think it was the end of April.
Got it. Could you let folks know kind of what a day in the life is of a chair? What do you do? And how much does this position pay? How long is it? How do you become a chair? Most people don't even consider these types of things, and I think it'd be informative for our listeners.
Yeah, so this role of state party chair is a volunteer position. I don't get any money for it. I do it purely because I believe in the political positions of the Democratic Party, and I believe that the Democratic Party, both at the local level and at the national level, is the best hope we have to let Americans have the kind of life that I believe that Americans should have. And so to become chair of District 11, which is the Fargo district, I literally just walked into the Democratic-NPL office and said, what district do I live in? And what can... And they said, well, what's your address? I told them. And they said, okay, well, you live in District 11, you have your monthly meeting on the third Thursday at 5:30. And I walked into the district meeting and I just said, what can I do to help? And then from there, I got more and more involved in political organizing. I put myself through graduate school as a union organizer for the Professional Staff Congress, AFL-CIO affiliate for educators, literally going door to door asking other educators and graduate students to sign union cards. So I was familiar with the basics of union organizing, which transfers very easily to political organizing. And then I just saw that there was more to be done. You know, listeners of this podcast, if you're in the weeds, you know that the Democratic-NPL is not at the strength that it once was in the state.
Oh, I don't think you need to be in the weeds to have observed that. No offense, but I mean it's not exactly a secret.
Yeah, so there was work to be done, and I wanted to be the one to do that work. And so the day-to-day of the state party chair, you know, again, it's a volunteer position. I have a full-time job. So I have to be very, you know, conscientious about the use of my time, but a lot of it is calling other Democratic activists around the state, trying to help find candidates, trying to help find volunteers. And then the other part of it is more public facing, carrying the message of the Dem-NPL. I was at the North Dakota Boys State yesterday, speaking to that group, just about what Democrats stand for. You know, I'm on this show now. So I'm just sort of trying to carry the Democratic message, Democratic-NPL message more broadly. So, you know, there really isn't an upper limit on the amount of time that's possible to spend. I wish that days had, you know, 28 hours and I could devote them all to this.
How do you, because the Democratic-NPL is not going to start to gain traction in the legislature at the ballot box again until you convince a lot of people who have been voting for Republicans to switch. And I mean, just now, so some of your rhetoric beginning out here where you say, you know, all the oil extraction money is going to out of state and we have broken dreams. I wonder if there's a lot of North Dakotans who are living their day-to-day lives, sending their kids to our public schools, watching as the oil industry deposits about 1 out of every 2 tax dollars our state collects, and sees a gap between reality and your rhetoric. And I say that as somebody who's been very critical of the turn that the NDGOP has taken on, you know, social issues. This last legislative session was an embarrassment where we're focused on book bans and a lot of these other things. I perceived that as a departure from the more pragmatic sort of governance that the Republican Party has used to build 30 years of supermajority control in the state. I listened to your rhetoric because I'm starting. I have been thinking like, okay, I think the Republicans are some of the Republicans, a faction of the Republicans, are moving the party, you know, sort of outside of the window of what I think a lot of North Dakota voters find acceptable. Can they find an alternative in the Democratic-NPL? And then I hear you talk, and I think I don't think that's going to appeal to North Dakota voters who have been voting for Republicans.
Well, I mean, I think actually about you a lot. You know, when I first moved to North Dakota, we would say, "Oh, here's Rob Port doing it again." And my wife and I, over the past year or two, we keep saying to ourselves, "I can't believe I agree. Did you read Rob Port? I think I agree with Rob Port." And it seems to be happening.
Welcome to the dark side.
Well, you know, I guess it depends which one of us thinks. You know, I think that you're right that there is a shift in the Republican Party recently. You know, as I said at the top, you know, I grew up in Oregon. Oregon had Republican senators my whole life growing up, and you know, no one in my family, I was too young to vote, you know, no one in my family voted for them, but they were fine. They were supportable people. They were honest people with decency and integrity. And I think that's probably fairly true of, you know, I think of the pre-run for president, Doug Burgum. You know, I wouldn't vote for him, but I don't think it's unreasonable to understand why he has such a high approval rating in the state. But I think that's not the Republican Party of the past 6 months, year, 2 years. And I think if you look at where the Republican Party will be, I mean, this is a debate that they're currently having about the Republican state party chair, right? What will the Republican Party be like in a year, 2 years, 4 years? I think that is not, that some large percentage of people who currently vote Republican and have in their past voted Democrat, right? It was not so long ago that, you know, most people who've pulled a lever for a Republican have also at some point in their lives pulled a lever for a Democrat.
Sure.
And I don't think they want book bans and politicians telling you what kind of healthcare you can get and what kind of clothes you can wear in public. And I don't think North Dakotans, especially those with sort of more libertarian, small government leaning, the Republican Party in North Dakota is not the party of small government. It's the party of intrusion into your most intimate personal choices, what books you read, who you can love, what kind of medical care you can get. So I think that presents an opportunity for the Democratic Party to say, actually, your values don't have to change to vote for the Democratic Party. Our values overlap in really substantial ways.
Adam, there's a Moneyball, if you will, aspect to political statewide, especially political party organizing. In the case of the Democratic-NPL trying to build itself back up again, have there been has there been talks? Is there a decided on plan when you're looking at 2024? Is it knowing that there's not really any absolutes, but is there a focus on municipal nonpartisan offices to gain traction? Is it a focus on, if Doug Burgum really is putting all of his, is all in on this presidential run, there might be an open seat for governor. And I've been present at conversations where the activist or the strategic crowd says, we got all chips gotta go in for governor, or all chips gotta go in for these nonpartisan races. We gotta build people up from the grassroots. I don't know what your conversations have been like, but what can we expect from the Dem-NPL message-wise and strategically coming up with 2024 next year?
Yeah, well, again, we are sort of we're a volunteer party, and I don't get to speak I am the chair of the Dem-NPL, but I don't get to, I don't tell everyone what to do or what to run for. And I think one of the strengths that we have as a party is that, the Williston Dems are going to sit down and think for themselves what message is best for Williston, what candidates are best for Williston, what races are most likely to be won in Williston. Those are, I like to distinguish between the formal structure of the Dem-NPL and the energy that's provided by volunteers whose desired policy outcomes might overlap. So, for instance, many of those municipal races that you talked about are nonpartisan. So, as such, the Democratic Nonpartisan League isn't planning to make a partisan push into those nonpartisan races. But I would say that the activists and volunteers and supporters who want to see policy changes at their local level that might be affected by a co-op, by an electric co-op, or might want to be or affected by a school board, right? Those people will decide for themselves which race is the best to organize and which race is the most winnable for them.
Do you, in terms of candidate recruitment, last cycle we had a very high-profile situation where your U.S. House candidate who received the endorsement at the Dem-NPL state convention that I was at, Mark Haugen, was ultimately pushed out of the race. Now, I know ultimately it was his decision. I guess he could have stayed in, but he had a lot of, he has said that he had a lot of high-profile Democrats calling him, telling him to get out in favor of Cara Munn, former Miss America, who had launched kind of a late independent run. Haugen clearly felt embittered by that. He ultimately has since joined the Republican Party. I guess my question, what I've heard some Democrats tell me is that is going to harm candidate recruitment, that there are going to be candidates who might be thinking about stepping up maybe into a statewide race or something like that, who are afraid that they're going to get poleaxed if something better comes along. How do you address that? Is the party going to stand behind its candidates going forward?
Yeah, well, I think that it's not, I don't mean this as a dodge. I just simply wasn't involved in any of those discussions or decisions. But I think ultimately, the politicians are representative. It's a representative democracy. And I think of it less as someone being so-called forced out and more of a grassroots action of people saying this candidate doesn't represent the values that we want to see in an elected official, and use their right in a.
But why didn't those people show up at the state convention where he was selected?
We don't want to vote for this person.
Yeah, but he was selected by Democrats at the state convention. I mean, there was a democratic process. They could have turned up to it. They didn't, or maybe they did and changed their minds. I don't know, but I mean, he wasn't. I mean, his point of his point of view on abortion was a big part of that, but it wasn't a secret when he was endorsed at the state convention. So you talk about a democratic process. There was one. He was chosen.
Well, the partisan politics of the Democratic nomination process are not perfectly overlapping with the actual process of voters in the state. So I think what Mark Haugen was hearing, and again, I'm sort of like speculating because I simply don't know, but if enough voters tell you they won't vote for you, it's not really a matter of partisan politics.
Yeah.
I think, I don't think it will harm voter candidate recruitment because candidates have values, and candidates come to us because they want to represent the values that, and the policies that mean something to them. To put your name on a ballot, especially as a Dem NPLer in North Dakota, I'm hugely in admiration of anyone who's willing to do that. And I think that it shows someone who truly believes in the values of the Dem NPL, individual flourishing, small government in the way that Republicans view small government, but in the way that Dem NPLers view small government. You get to make choices about how to live your own life without government interference.
He was the top vote getter in the previous cycle when he ran for treasurer. He was the top vote getter for the Dem NPL on the statewide ballot. So I don't know. I mean, that to me seemed like a very interesting dynamic.
Adam, go ahead.
Go for it.
Oh, it's Adam. I wanted to ask. You're the new chair this year of the North Dakota Democratic-NPL Party. That means that you have interactions with DNC. And I'll say this: you don't have to get in trouble. But I was wondering how you found your interactions with the DNC. For me, I've been frustrated with them as a national party. And I'm sure Republicans get this same thing. But I feel like they run a 17-state party now nationally, not to a person. But I just feel like there's not individualized messaging being put out per state that current technology, social media, digital advertising would allow for. There doesn't seem to be, it's extremely frustrating for me during presidential elections that they're not national elections. I don't feel like. I feel like they're 6-state elections. I'm guessing there are Republicans that feel this way too. There are 5 million Californians that voted for Donald Trump that will never be represented. Their political viewpoints will never be represented by their state in California. And so it's frustrating for me. I'm wondering how you, as a volunteer Dem NPL chair, have found your interactions with the DNC. Maybe you disagree, or maybe you're able to take a voice there from a rural state that's different. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I was a member. I mean, I still am as chair or representative to the DNC, but in my previous position within the party, I was called a committee man. North Dakota gets 4 representatives to the Democratic Party gets 4 representatives to the DNC, the chair, vice chair, and then 2 people of different genders. The committee, currently the committee woman, Ruth Buffalo, and the committee man, Jamie Selsler. And I thought like, okay, I'm in now. Like now I'm on the inside. You hear all this, the DNC put his finger on the scales for this. The DNC put his fingers on the scale of the DNC. And I thought, haha, Adam, you're at the DNC now. And I got there, and what I found was committed activists from all across the country, not really that much different than I am, just trying to help push forward economic justice and racial justice and environmental justice, and just truly people committed to making the world better. And it turned out not to be the cloak and dagger power center that I'd hoped it would be.
How many people asked if North Dakota was a Canadian province when you went to DC?
I can attest. It is kind of shockingly banal when you're in the what John. I always liked the John Bolton book title, the room where it happened. Which obviously came from the Hamilton play or musical, but how banal it is to be in that room at times. I've been in a few of those rooms, and it's just kind of like, boy, this is not the smoky back room is not as much of an adventure as I thought it was going to be.
Smoky nor back. I think the thing about the DNC, and this is my message sort of broadly to Dem-NPLers across the state and anyone who's looking for a change in politics, I think it's often a cop-out to look and say, well, why isn't the DNC blah, blah, blah? And it's like, we're a representative democracy. Each of us has a citizen obligation to participate in our politics, right? That's a core American value, that there's not some ruling people elsewhere. And, I don't know, people maybe look at me and say, oh, that guy's the chair of the party. But I literally 8 years ago walked into the office of the Dem-NPL and said, like, what district am I in and what can I do? And I just kept putting my hand up to volunteer for stuff. So I think it's kind of a cop-out to look and say, why isn't the DNC doing this for us? Why aren't you doing it for you in your own community? So that's my goal as Dem-NPL chair, to say, let's do this in our own community. There's no one else coming to save us. There's no other, deep fat check that's going to save us. There's no shortcut. There's no silver bullet. The way we're going to gain political strength in North Dakota is by going door to door, phone call, neighbor to neighbor, telling what the Dem-NPL stands for.
I'm sure you've seen heard the Byron Dorgan recalling it's a founding father story about like, oh no, who's going to do this? Or it was writing the Constitution. One of the more headline founding fathers said, there's nobody. There is only us. This is it. This is the room. We're stuck with, and for better or worse, we're stuck with us. So we better come up with something good. Rob, you were saying,
I've been listening, and I've been writing a lot about, sort of populism, because we live in a very populist age, and I think a lot of that has to do with social media, and it's driven a lot more engagement, I think, than we've had in the past. But I also wonder when I hear you talking about, well, the Williston Democrats are going to decide what's best for them, and the Fargo Democrats will decide what's best for them, and I'm wondering, I mean, because there's this tension between sort of what the masses want and what's maybe right. Like, for instance, looking at the Republican primary right now, I mean, you have Donald Trump under criminal indictment, and his support, he's consistently pulling over 50%. Joe Biden's approval numbers are down in the 30s. Frankly, his approval ratings aren't much better than Donald Trump's, and yet he's probably going to be the Democratic nominee again to run for a second term. And I'm wondering, like, yes, there are a lot of people showing up, and yes, it's a democratic process, but what if the people are wrong? Like, what if they're making bad choices? And to me, I think that's a very interesting tension, because on one hand, like, we're all trained, we beat our chest, democracy, the will of the people and everything, but what if the people are wrong? What if they're making bad decisions? I don't know. And so when I'm hearing you kind of say, well, the Williston Dem is just kind of up to them, and I'm looking over at the North Dakota Republican Party, and they have kind of that problem. The District 2 Democrats are basically a Sons of Liberty chapter who have declared the District 2 Republicans, yes, and basically have declared independence from the state party, and it's like, well, we're just going to do what we're going to do. I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing. Like I do think there has to be some structure, like the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or the Libertarian Party or the Green Party, whatever it is, has to like stand for something, and it has to be, people have to know what they're getting for. And so this kind of loosey, I don't know what point, I apologize, I don't know what question I'm trying to ask you, but these are all the things that are running through my mind as I'm observing what's going on, and I'm taking a very contrarian point of view again, because I know I'm not supposed to be, I wouldn't call it anti-democracy, but I am very anti-populist. I don't think might makes right. I don't think majorities are always right. I think, in fact, they're often wrong. And so I guess, can you speak to that a little bit as somebody who's trying, I guess, to build, and maybe in the context of some of your previous comments?
Yeah, well, I think what you pointed is to something that obviously the founders of the nation spent a lot of time wrestling with. They didn't make it a direct democracy, right? They made it a mixed.
Madison's famous quote was that even if every single person was Plato, there would still be a mob, right? So
we do, local state structures of representative democracy. And then, of course, we do also build in various direct democratic checks against the power of the representative aspect, right? The referendum process in North Dakota, for instance, is a sort of direct democratic check on, and then, we have this mixed balance, this mixed Republican democracy. It's a sort of core principle of political organizing that you can't blame the voters, right?
Even when they deserve it.
What?
Even when they deserve it.
So I think what we engage in the political sphere is in the art of rhetoric and persuasion. And I don't mean that in a hollow sort of, hollow trickery sort of way, like we can use fancy words and make you believe whatever we want. But in the sense of, when I say I don't want politicians in Bismarck telling teachers in the state what books they can teach or what pronouns they can or can't use, that those are sort of fundamental values attacks on the liberty of Americans to speak what they want, to dress how they want, to participate how they want. I'm literally on this show, so I'm hoping that people hear and say, oh yeah, you know what? It's like when I read your columns, like, I can't believe I agree with Rob Port. I hope there's some listener out there's like, I can't believe I agree with Adam Goldwyn. That guy's a Democrat. So I think we are our job is really to sort of educate people and say, we believe in core American values. And you talk about, a lot of these processes, the people think of North Dakota as a red state or as a Republican state. And of course even I'm not going to deny that at this point in time, the Republican Party has the majority of voters are pulling the lever for Republicans. But Democrats get anywhere from a quarter to a third of the statewide vote, and yet we have fewer than 10% of statewide of the state Senate, for instance. And that's not a problem with voters, right? That's a problem with legislators gerrymandering. North Dakota has one of the most brutal in the nation.
That's not even remotely accurate. Wow.
And I've been on canvassing committees where we have so-called signature match. I've seen ballots get thrown out where voters' ballots get discounted because a signature they signed on an absentee ballot request form 6 months earlier, the J curls down instead of up 6 months later when they fill out their absentee ballot.
Well, I can't speak to that, but laying the blame for where the Democratic-NPL is today on gerrymandering is not something that's rooted in reality.
It is rooted in reality. I'm not saying that the Democrats would have 46 of 47 seats, but 4 out of 47, when you're winning a quarter to a third of the vote, represents that. But you're comparing a statewide vote versus an apportioned legislative district by district. Like, how many of those votes came from Fargo? Centered in a few. There's no question that the Democrats in North Dakota are centered in some population areas around the state. So, but the legislature is apportioned geographically. So you're comparing apples to oranges, Adam. Well, gerrymandering is the drawing of population into geography in ways that's
just called districting.
Well, redistricting and gerrymandering are interlocked phenomena, right? You must redistrict, but how you draw those districts to dilute the power of your political opposition is what we call.
Yeah, I think that's a fairy tale, but we'll save that debate for another day.
Well, I wanted to ask before we left, because we have a vote coming up this weekend with your opposition party. The Republicans are electing a new chair. Adam, I was wondering, do you have much interaction with, again, just kind of behind the scenes, do you have much interaction with Perry Schaefer? He isn't someone I have heard a lot of or a lot about. Have you ever encountered his opponent, Sandy? I think it's Sandy Sanford.
Sandy Sanford, yeah.
Or do you have any? Want to leave you off, but do you have any commentary on what this seemingly this split within the leadership of the GOP and how it's reflected in the public policy that's impacting North Dakotans' lives directly?
I mean, honestly, I haven't really put any thought into what Republicans are doing. And I don't mean that again as a cop out. I'm interested in organizing Democrats, and I'm interested in helping grow Democratic strength. I would think if you speak to our legislators, the Dem-NPL legislators have more interaction with Republican legislators than sort of party infrastructure, party infrastructure volunteers like myself have with Republican counterparts. So I'm not following that situation really at all.
Sure. And that makes sense. I just, for a lot of people, they just never consider running to become a chair of a party, and they wonder how that all works. And as you guys were saying previously, what, is there a smoky back room? Do you guys get together? Do you talk? I don't know. I remember when Bob Harms was chair, he did a lot of outreach, including to Democrats, about things that he thought would be better for party organization, for district organization. I can remember Bob Harms coming to Kylie Overson and I on the House floor and saying, state law dictates that we have to have these delegates per precinct, and I don't think the state has any business telling our political parties that. I just was wondering, if the Democrats agree, we'd like to amend that out. And we both agreed. It was just this funny interaction where, like, the chair of the Republican Party was like, hey, should we, do this more in a way that, gives autonomy to the political parties? And we said, yeah, sure. And I had no idea if that had kept up or what Perry's style was, because I frequently have to get reminded who Perry Schaefer is. And that's, again, no offense to the man. I just don't know him, and I don't hear from him. I don't hear from his style. He can come on the show and prove me wrong, and tell me I'm full of it. But I'm guessing he doesn't care what Ben Hanson thinks either.
Yeah, well, it's part of that's probably a product of just the declining influence of political parties. I mean, a lot of it's candidate driven anymore, and it's a little bit. And no offense to the Democratic-NPL, you don't have any statewide candidates, and so I think Perry is probably somebody who gets overshadowed by Governor Burgum and Senator Kramer and Congressman Armstrong and John Hoeven and some of these other people who are far more prominent than Adam is kind of, obviously there's people like Josh Moshe and stuff who are in leadership positions, but it's just a different dynamic, I think, for the Dem-NPL. But Adam, last words to you, and we'll put a pin in it there.
Yeah, just thanks for having me on. I guess I would just say, there is no, for any listener who wants to get involved in the political process, can't speak for what it's like as a Republican. But for the Dem-NPL, there is no back room. There is no smoky room. It's an open door for those who walk in and want to volunteer or want to find a place for themselves in helping to shape the future of the state. Just walk in or call or and.
Do you have to pay to be a voting member of a legislative district party in the Dem-NPL, Adam?
You do not have to pay.
Well, that's interesting, because in the District 46 Republican Party, you gotta pay your dues in order to be a voting member now.
Yeah, that's pretty typical, I think. Honestly, I'm surprised that people get wrapped around the axle about that. That seems like pretty normal practice in most places. But
when you find out why they put it in, what the motivations were, from what I've heard from my
listen, if you want to talk about chicanery, in District 3 up here in Minot, they made it so that you had to be a dues-paying member the year previous, right? Yeah. So if you just moved into the district, you couldn't. Yeah,
then they suddenly told you. Right,
if you want to be critical of district, if you want to be critical, we're going to get into that. We're going to let Adam go, and then we'll get into all the chicanery going on at the district level.
Adam, thanks for coming on. When Rob Port says, the District 2 Republicans have a weird Sons of Liberty thing going on, that's your cue to say, and the District 2 Dem-NPL party believes in liberty.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your time.
Hi there, my name is James Wallner. I produce and host the podcast Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast that tackles historical and unsolved crimes in the upper Midwest. Follow along with me as we search for a missing girl, attempt to solve a 45-year-old murder, and much, much more. That's Dakota Spotlight Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at inforum.com/podcasts.
Okay, just finish up our interview with new Dem-NPL Chairman Adam Goldwyn, who's apparently a fan of my columns. Thank you for reading, Adam. I appreciate it. You're not doing me any favors by talking about how often you agree with me. I get that all the time. The whole Rob Port changed. You're a liberal now, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the problem is some pretty basic values things have come to the fore in modern politics, and I don't view them as partisan values necessarily. Treating people with dignity and respect, I don't think is a partisan thing or should be a partisan thing. I don't think that that book bans should be a partisan thing. We should be against those sorts of things. So, I don't know that I've become a liberal, just insofar as I'm not willing to follow a lot of Republicans down some rabbit hole where they're abandoning their principles in favor of, sort of the culture war politics of the moment, right? It's Republicans right now, like you're supposed to be anti-trans. Trans is supposed to send you up through, and make you super upset, and it just doesn't for me. It's live and let live for me. I don't.
There's a line, I can't remember who said it originally, but I know it got said a lot around Kent Conrad's office, which was show me your, it was what you budget is what you prioritize shows your values. You can vote on, everyone votes on every bill. You can vote on 60 bills. When you look at some of, frankly, the young Republican freshmen who we spoke about on length and had a few on the show, and what they're prioritizing on social media, what they're talking about, the bills they're prime sponsoring, it talks directly to what you're saying. It's not a Ed Schaefer, John Hoeven, press release on this tax incentive we feel is going to fill in this many jobs, et cetera, because that's, I think it's because it's boring. It doesn't get clicks for them. Yeah. And
well, Ed,
follow it down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I mean, it's also not. I mean, depending on what happens at the reorg, this cycle where you have Sandy Sanford, who's the wife of former Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford, who is very active. She was a founder of what's called North Dakota CAN, which was organized did a lot of the activism work behind the book ban bills, did a lot of the activism work behind, like the pronoun bills and some of this stuff. She has been sharply critical of Doug Burgum, particularly during the pandemic, on social media. The rumor is that's part of why Brent Sanford left Governor Burgum's administration before the term was up. So
unconfirmed by Brent and the governor, it should be noted. But
I mean, they deny it.
But the dots look pretty.
I mean,
connected.
that's the rumor. Good. Thank you for interjecting that. If she, she's somebody who takes over the party, I think there's going to be a lot of people who are kind of left out in the cold. But the party's running scared from it, which was kind of my point for Adam too, where the party's running scared from its base, right? I watched the juxtaposition, and I think it's such an interesting comparison because you have Joe Biden and Donald Trump, neither of them are popular. Donald Trump, I mean, they're both polling at like 30% approval. And yet in their respective primary polls, Joe Biden, obviously an incumbent, but he is facing a challenge from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And who's that? Marianne Williamson, the other, I think she's in play too. Sure. But he's polling over 50% in the Democratic primary. Mm-hmm. Trump's consistently polling over 50%. Although there was a drop this morning. And maybe that has something to do with him being, he was down, but that was one poll, so who knows?
In the drop, did anyone else come up? Did like Ron?
I don't have the numbers
come up. Did everybody come up?
I just kind of looked at the top Trump number. I didn't analyze it, but they have, but Trump's consistently been polling over 50%. Yet both of them are polling. I mean, so to me, that's a massive disconnect between primary voters, right? The activists, the people who are the most politically involved, and the general electorate. There is a disconnect. And the problem, though, is that the activists are picking the candidates. And then by the time they get to the general electorate, it's basically a binary choice between two unpopular people.
And thus far, though, hasn't been a deal breaker for Republican success at the ballot box. But that's thus far. And if I'm Adam, I'm looking at this sharp wedge coming up, this crack in the GOP, and I would put a chisel between that and slam a hammer behind it if I could. I'd be going directly to almost not a Republican base, but like you need a budget for all these things. Nothing's free, nothing's easy, and that was my point in asking him. What goes on behind the scenes? How much do you get paid? Because like you guys were saying, the smoky back room, it kind of doesn't exist. There's not a lot of puppet strings. I
would argue the North Dakota Republican Party is being taken over right now precisely because there's no smoky back room. It's a very open process, and whatever else you want to say about the people who have been using it, and there has been some shenanigans along the way that aren't great. But for the most part, it's an open process, and they've taken advantage of it. They're winning. They're the ones who are showing up.
The Chamber of Commerce, or the more, maybe not politically active, but definitely Republican, business community in these areas, and saying, hey, do you like, you guys liked or supported Shannon Roars Jones, or I knew up in Minot when Andy Maragos essentially got routed by the most fundamentalist element of the Republican Party up in Minot, having been, I think, a pretty good representative for Minot for I don't know how many years. There's example after example of that in my district. In
Senator Karen Krebsbach, who was censured by, her own, probably one of the most influential appropriators in the state, is censured by her own party.
Going to them and saying, listen, we care about, access and affordability when it comes to childcare, which you have all identified as a major workforce issue. We certainly care, and Dem-NPL legislators have been putting forward tuition freezes and some kind of ability to wrap our minds and wallets around the cost of higher education. There's a lot of different routes to it, but we've been talking about it. Right now, the new upcoming element wants to talk about trans bans, book bans, basically just government banning things in your personal life, in your professional life, wherever it can.
And we're not talking about plowing the roads. We're not doing the boring work. And it's like that. They don't like that part of the job. They don't really want to do that part of the job. And a lot of them, frankly, are allowed to sort of indulge their stupid social agenda because grown-ups show up and vote for. I mean, you look, a lot of them, they vote against these appropriation bills, right? Despite the fact that we have to fund our schools, they just vote against everything. And they're afforded that luxury because there are still enough adults in the legislature to get the bills passed.
And they vote about and brag about voting against most of the economic incentives passed that are some of the, key, points in press releases from Governor Burgum, ones that Democrats usually wind up voting for. I mean, it's just, it's tiring, and that wedge needs to be pointed out and driven, because I think what you're saying about, might come off to somebody about the election of the Republican chair might come off as something extremely behind the scenes or in the weeds, but really, truly,
it's not.
What you're talking about, if Sandy Sanford becomes the chair, is not, it's very much out of the norm. You don't have a lieutenant governor or lieutenant governor's spouse in Montana or Minnesota that are of the same party as the governor, sharply criticizing them, or in her case, floating support for a primary challenge to the sitting congressman. For context, a primary challenge to Kelly Armstrong, the former chair of the North Dakota Republican Party, a chairmanship during which they had unprecedented success.
Also,
now she's looking to become chair.
I mean, don't forget Armstrong, Burgum, these people that they're setting, with John Hoeven, are winning elections with like high 60, low 70% of the vote consistently, easily. I mean, one landslide election after another. It's clear that North Dakota voters seem to like what they're getting with these people, but there's a faction of the party that doesn't like it, and that's where we're heading. And part of the reason I wanted to have Adam on was to talk about, is there a potential, if people become disillusioned with the NDGOP, will the Democratic-NPL be a landing place for them? And I don't know. I mean, when I hear Adam, this is what he said when Doug Burgum, who, by the way, on the last election got 68% of the vote. He said, the last thing the country needs is another bored billionaire whose need for attention is greater than his commitment to the American people as the president of the greatest country in the world. Burgum's presidential campaign will be short, but the harm he has done to North Dakotans will last generations. That last line, do you think the 68% or so of North Dakotans who voted for him, the 70% or so who consistently answer approval polls, who say they approve of his job, do they think that line, that line's not going to play with them? This is the person they voted for.
I don't think Adam, nor anyone who's trying to represent or rebuild a minority party, and in this case it happens to be the Democratic-NPL, are going to get anywhere by trying to be their opposition light. If he gave faint praise or skirted around or didn't directly address and frankly attack, because he's the chair of the opposition party, the governor who is now running for president, you're not going to draw any kind of distinction or contrast. And think back even to Doug Burgum's initial primary campaign in 2016, he was sharply critical of his own party, because you have to draw a distinction. If he had come out and simply said, yeah, it looks pretty good, which, he's not going to say that, but there is no tightrope that someone in his role could walk that would satisfy everybody and anybody, including, so you have to create the narrative and drive the narrative.
But the narrative has to be rooted in reality. The harm Doug Burgum's done North Dakotans will last generations.
There were protesters outside I went to the presidential announcement. There were protesters outside of them. Were they as big as the people inside? Not necessarily.
There were 11
somewhere.
There were 11 outside.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about a political party that wants to retake or try to retake or have even a smaller minority presence. I don't think this is the way. And every cycle I hear this. Well, we got to go on. Every chair has done this previously. This isn't an Adam Goldwyn thing. They've all attacked like this. And they all continue to at some point you keep doing the same thing over and over again. Do you think you're going to get a different result?
But the alternate, what's the alternate though? The alternate can't be, Doug's running for president. That's interesting. Like, you can't just say
I think the alternate is maybe something
silent.
like House Minority Leader. Well, former House Minority Leader Josh Boucher. This is what he posted about Burgum running on Twitter. I wish Doug Burgum the best of luck. I said at. I'm reading his tweet. I wish Doug Burgum the best as he begins his run to be the GOP presidential candidate. There is much he and I disagree on, but we both agree our country would be served well if the GOP selected a moderate Republican like Doug over the extreme ones they've advanced lately. See, I thought that was very nice. And I think that sort of tone is going to be more winning with people who are becoming disillusioned with the Republican Party. I think would be more comfortable turning to somebody like Josh Boucher and the way he talks about politics than somebody like Adam Goldwyn. And I say that I'm not ripping on Adam. I know if you're the chair, you're kind of the party's attack dog. But I'm just saying, I think the Boucher approach is better.
I don't think that's his role, and I don't think you can draw a distinction there. If you're just saying, yeah, us too, or that's interesting, you're just going to get lost. And if I'm a Democratic activist or looking to my chair to provide some leadership, if I were a Republican activist, I'd be confused and wondering where Perry Schaefer is when the more extreme, either I agree with the Sandy Sanfords of the world and wondering why Perry isn't there, or I disagree with her and I'm wondering, hey, Perry, where the heck are you?
Yeah.
And
the party, it was kind of
funny.
The NDGOP sent out their press release about Burgum running for president like 24 hours after he announced. Like the news had broke, everybody had covered it, and all of a sudden here popped up in my inbox a statement from Perry Schaefer like 24 to 36 hours later.
What was the statement? I didn't, because I never.
Oh my gosh. Hold on. I could pull it up here. Cover me.
See right here. The two of us are as in the weeds as it gets, and we can't remember what Perry Schaefer said about Doug Burgum running for office. We can remember what Adam said. That right there.
Okay. So this came out. When did he announce? He announced his
1 week ago.
He announced on Wednesday, a week ago, the 7th. This press release landed in my inbox June 8th at 8:41 p.m.
That's time to put out a press release.
Right. And it said, this was Perry Schaefer's statement. Governor Doug Burgum's announcement to run as North Dakota's first Republican presidential candidate on the platforms of economy, energy, and national security offers a unique option for voters within the state and nationally. A large, diverse number of candidates reinvigorates the national political arena on multiple levels, not only for voters, but for the energy of the race, and blah, blah, blah. Governor Burgum's entry into the race holds significant value for the state of North Dakota. So, and I understand also, when you're the party and you have multiple Republican candidates running, the party can't really take sides, even though it's the hometown guy. I get that.
Sure, but what? Boy, would you like some mayo on your toast?
Also coming like more than like 36, like I said, about 36 hours after the announcement. That's not great.
When Adams said Doug Burgum was a bored billionaire running for office, it's mean, but then it's up to Doug. But Doug's a big boy. He can just go out and prove Adam wrong by showing us what distinguishes him from the field. Do you think in this? So you announced a week ago. I know because I got to be there. It was fun being at the event. It was fun seeing all
we
the
did
locals.
We did a
and then
podcast basically
then I ran to
almost from the venue.
And then I ran to the back room of shout out to Atomic Coffee in downtown Fargo and recorded a podcast with you.
I don't know. I mean, maybe
that he's announced. Do you think he's distinguished himself from the field as a necessary entry into the race?
Not yet. There's race. I mean, he's starting to show up in the polls at 1%. That's what he needs. He needs contributions. He needs to get on the debate stage, and I think that'll be the inflection point. If he makes the debate stage, he's gotta make an impression there. And if he doesn't, he's done.
I really wonder if that's the right bet. Do debate stages matter anymore, especially when your front runner is very likely to skip?
I think when your name recognition is effectively zero, yes, it matters a great deal. I think he has to. I think for Doug Burgum, and I'm not talking about the strategy for all the candidates. I'm talking about the strategy for Doug Burgum. He's got to get on that debate stage. And also by the way, in 2 weeks there's going to be an FEC report due. The due date's the 30th, which means we'll probably get the report sometime that next week. And he's got to have convincing numbers in that report.
He's got to show up. And let's talk about money for a second here.
Sure.
Doug has spent $6 million?
2.4, 2.6, something like that, on his first TV buys in Iowa and New Hampshire. Focused mostly on Iowa. I think more than half of it was in Iowa.
Now here's some context for that, and it's not apples. It's apples to oranges. I'll cop to that. But let me. So when I worked on Tim Mathern's gubernatorial campaign, he ran for governor against Hoeven in 2008. We were obviously, a dark horse candidate at best, and we ran, I believe, a TV ad that got statewide coverage in an unbusy media market, and for 2 weeks of TV it cost $60,000. Doug Burgum is up with a 2 weeks of TV and radio in Iowa at about $1.25 million, right?
Yeah.
$1.5 million.
But obviously, it's Iowa.
Years have passed. It's a busier media market, but
it's a bigger media market. I mean, what's Iowa's population? 5 million?
About 4 times ours. A little less than that. That's about Minnesota's population. I think it's like 3.8.
Okay.
But it is a bigger media market. But that $1.5 million, aka amount of money most people won't see in their lifetime, is being spent on 2 weeks worth of ads. So he is carpet bombing the same media-wise, the same way he carpet bombed.
But one of the reasons it costs more is because so is his competition. They're up with TV ads too. They're running. They're
but also. My understanding was he's outspending everyone right now in Iowa.
It could
be.
That could be.
That's findable information. I thought I saw it on CBS. I should look that up.
That could be. That could very well be true. But I think that's a really good point if you want to talk about how competitive Doug Burgum can be financially. Absolutely, he can be competitive. Now, the thing is it's not, you don't just spend money and then magically get support. You have to spend money in pursuit of the right message. I mean, we have Donald Trump spent far less than Hillary Clinton did, and Hillary Clinton lost, although she won the popular vote. Maybe that's not a great comparison. Michael Bloomberg, outspent everybody when he ran for president.
That's the interesting comparison. Now, there's a couple of differentiating factors. Doug is getting in way before Michael Bloomberg. That truly was a bored billionaire just looking at a field and deciding one day, consulting no one, I could do better than them, and spending what was it, like there's $250 million running nationally to win 3 delegates and get promptly shooed out of the race, having not been certainly not a lifelong Democrat, just in general, not really identifying with the party, and gee, what a surprise, therefore not getting a lot of support from Democrats, which, 1 + 1 = 2, Michael. Doug is, spent time and has signed very conservative bills and has that pedigree. So I think he won't be viewed suspiciously by their party base, but I wonder if they're convinced.
Yeah, I think the bored billionaire appellation to Doug Burgum is unfair in 2 ways. First of all, his campaign tells me he's not a billionaire. They say he has 9-figure wealth. Everyone calls him a billionaire.
Whatever. I think it's money I'll never see, and most people will never see. Nobody cares.
I realize. I want to make it clear. They say he's not a billionaire. I don't have a way to say one way or the other. Maybe he should release his tax returns, but I don't have.
Well, I mean, he's gonna have to if he's running.
I don't have that information. I can't imagine they deny it if it wasn't. I don't know why they would lie about that.
Sure.
So I can't imagine why. I'm willing to take their word at it. I think it's probably a distinction without a difference, but and everyone's going to call him a billionaire anyway. So I don't. But I'm trying to be accurate. He's not a billionaire. But the other thing is, I don't think he's doing this because he's bored. I think Doug Burgum's ambitions are very real. I think when he ran for governor, he wasn't just, he was very involved, much more so than a lot of his critics, including me, thought he was going to be. I think he really wants this.
Agreed.
And I think he's motivated, but agree with his policies or not, I think his motivations are pure.
And now that I've watched his hustle, I've watched the campaign messaging, because he immediately had a event that got at least decent coverage locally, got so-so coverage nationally, but there's only so much you can help.
And also, I mean, that was a crowded week too. Christie announced, Pence announced, there was a lot going on.
If you really want to get into the big leagues, you could argue that there are more dexterous campaigns that could maneuver around that, but he chose not to. But he immediately jumped in a plane, I assume, and got to Iowa, did a lot of events, got plenty of media, plenty of video, had full-on slow-motion shots of him throwing baseballs and cooking pork in Iowa. There you go.
And at a diner in New Hampshire.
And then in New Hampshire with Governor Sununu there. So he's not – so I've been fully convinced he's not running for a cabinet position. That combined with Donald Trump's, pledge that if you're running against me, you ain't gonna work for me. And Donald Trump says a lot of things. I think even if Ron DeSantis is the nominee and ultimately wins the White House, I don't think Doug Burgum. I mean, first of all, serving in the Trump cabinet is likely to get you indicted. I mean, that's the reality. I don't know that there are very many alumni of the take a
Trump
look at Rex
administration
Tillerson and a long successful career in the oil industry, and then a short, really crappy one.
Who are right? I don't know a lot. I don't know a lot of people who joined the Trump administration who are feeling now like that was a good idea.
And he's smart enough to see that.
I don't think Doug Burgum, even if it's President Nikki Haley, I don't know that Doug Burgum wants a cabinet position. I think he wants to be president.
I agree with you. But what is the distinction that he is making? 2 points on that. One, it's through no fault of his own. We don't know a whole lot about his foreign policy stances. That's because he was a businessman who did international business and therefore would not want to upset an apple cart. And again, I do not blame him for that. And two, he was a governor, and therefore most of his foreign policy interaction was the Canadian border because his state borders Canada. Now he's put out a couple of statements. One of them is direct. I'm going to rebuild the military
to win the Cold War with China.
Fight a Cold War that we're apparently having with China. It's an interesting one because, what other Cold Wars are we having? What other? He is in national interviews, in my opinion, correctly named America's adversaries. But then the natural follow-through, which is the leading president nominee in my political party, has been extremely chummy, both in rhetoric and in personal meetings with leaders of these countries who I am naming as America's enemies.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that result in some kind of criticism of the front runner? And he will not say Trump's name to save his life.
Well, that was the other thing, and I brought that up at a column. He went on the Good Morning America. He went on Good Morning America. Went on the TV, and it was like Good Morning America 3, which I don't even know what that is. There's 3 iterations of Good Morning America now. I didn't know that. Right. I don't know. That was what it was. GMA 3 is what it was called. You can tell how much I watch television.
Yeah.
So anyway, but he was on there and they were interviewing him and they kept asking him, Trump was indicted, giving him opportunities to criticize the front runner, and he dodges it. He won't say, to this point, I don't know that he has said Donald Trump's name in a critical way on the campaign trail, and that is astounding to me. The man is under federal indictment. You are literally taking up policy positions that are opposed to him. You are naming China and Russia as enemies to be resisted by the United States. Donald Trump's their friends.
And North Korea.
And Iran.
Donald Trump has a beautiful love letter from the leader of North Korea and really respects how much his cabinet members stand at attention when he commands people in North Korea.
Right.
He
meanwhile,
really
North Koreans are starving to death, but sure. Sure, the people who are afraid of being shot for showing insufficient deference to dear leader, that's a wonderful thing for the American.
Completely unnecessary, harmful hostilities towards our allies, Korea or South Korea and Japan.
What a wonderful thing for the American president to praise. So yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. I don't understand. If you're going to take positions that are distinct from Donald Trump, I'm not saying you got to call the guy names, right? I'm not saying that you have to do what Trump does and come up with a nickname for him or something like that. Just say, listen, it's problematic.
Well, in fact, please don't.
You know, you can even say, listen, Donald Trump's going to have his day in court, but boy, it's going to be tough to win a national election when you're under indictment. Right? I mean, you can even say, I think it's fair to question, is the Department of Justice applying the law equally when Mike Pence and Hillary Clinton, some of these other people who had classified documents or were loosey-goosey with the nation's secrets didn't face consequences? I think that's a fair question to ask. You can also say that doesn't excuse anything that Donald Trump did. He had national security information that could risk our relationship with our allies, our ability to keep our country safe, our men and women in the clandestine services, our men and women in the military. All of those documents could endanger them. He had them stored in a bathroom at Mar-a-Lago. I'm sorry. I don't understand why you can't talk about that and say that's a problem.
And when you're choosing to run for president aggressively, and I mean that as a compliment, and you're choosing your top 3 platform points, and one of them is national security, when someone, a former president who's running for president, currently against you for the nomination, has this big of a national security breach and lies about it, which is now on record, whose lawyers have now abandoned him, you can't ignore that. That's more than, it's not even an elephant in a room. It's I don't know what, Godzilla in the room. Yeah. My metaphors are stupid.
Listen, I'm not some highly paid, nobody's going to pay me to advise their campaign. I'm just a lowly newspaper columnist from North Dakota. But I got to tell you, if I'm the candidate and I want to get named, how do you set yourself apart from the pack? Well, maybe be one of the few candidates, Chris Christie being the other one, maybe be the candidate who's willing to name Donald Trump when you're criticizing him. And maybe be the candidate to point out, look at all the people who Donald Trump has hired who don't like him now. All the people that he appointed to his administration who don't like him now, including Nikki Haley, who was ambassador to the United Nations, who's now running against Donald Trump, although she has her own adventures with how to criticize him when she's not being very critical.
When we talk about fixing a crazy economy, which is from his ad, and we talk about, there's the standard Republican line, as a business person, the way the government spends is driving me crazy. Well, again, Donald Trump's your main competition. How many trillions of dollars, what percentage of the national debt was added to during the Trump administration? It was over 20% of the total national debt. It was trillions. Was it 5 trillion? I can't remember. Yeah. This was not. I would love to hear a Republican say, no, we're going to take a real belt tightening stance. Yeah. I'm going to show. I thought this was a failure.
We'll talk about Donald Trump accumulated more national debt in 4 years than Barack Obama did in 8. That's a great line for a Republican candidate. Say it out loud. I mean, it is.
And you don't have to say it the way that this Democrat wants you to say it. You can say, I'm so concerned about the credit card bill we're swiping on our grandchildren, and Donald Trump was part of that, and we need someone in there who's going to be an adult in the room.
You could say that Donald Trump was beat. I mean, if you want, Joe Biden already beat Donald Trump once. He can beat him again. We need somebody different. We need somebody different to run against Joe Biden.
Right now, where the conspiracy theorists are with the base and the percentage they have, I'm not saying it's not a majority of the American people, but it's unfortunately a good chunk of people that show up to caucuses or primaries. I don't even know if it's a majority there, but it's too big. And frankly, the candidates right now running against Trump are too scared, with the exception of Christie, who's doing a kamikaze nosedive.
Yeah, well, Christie, whatever else you want to say about Chris Christie, the man is engaged in an act of civic hygiene. Somebody has to do it. I'm glad he's doing it. He's telling the truth. Good, more power to him. Whatever else he's guilty of in his political career, this is a good thing. And
you may not want to get paid for advising the campaign, but as a volunteer podcast co-host, I will gladly be paid to advise their campaign. So I'm sure the calls will come rolling in.
I'd have to give up my day job as a columnist, and I love my day job, and I can give them advice anyway. I'll just write it up in a column and send it over. But I do not understand. Like, if Doug Burgum wanted to make a splash in this race, say the man's name over and over again. He's the front runner. He's over 50% of the polls, one poll after another. Talk about why he can't be the nominee again.
And Burgum did not hesitate criticizing sharply, and I thought sometimes incorrectly, the sitting Attorney General Wayne Stenger when he ran for the primary. So what makes this different now? It's interesting. It's clearly intentional, but clearly the two of us don't like it.
Yeah, well, and again, I think he's afraid if he criticizes. I mean, part of the quandary is, what do you do when the voters are acting irrationally, right? Because democracy is rooted in the idea that voters are going to act rationally. They're going to make rational decisions. Continuing to support somebody who's under federal indictment for mishandling, state secrets, among other things. I mean, all the other problems is not a rational decision.
Initiative is something I can't say on air, but take the initiative. Start being the thing at the front of the big boat that breaks up the ice. There, you can see how sophisticated Ben's shipping.
The icebreaker. I think that's literally called the icebreaker.
Just the icebreaker. Okay, be the icebreaker at the tip of the ship. If the ship's going to move forward, sometimes you got to break up some ice. Do it. Take the. It's easy for me to say sitting on the sidelines.
When you're Doug Burgum and you're polling at 0 or 1% consistently, I don't think you can afford to be timid. I think if you're waiting for your opening or something, I think that's a good way to lose and see Donald Trump be the nominee again. I think you got to go for it. But
we got a big election for North Dakota politics this weekend. If we can, I'd love to have the chair on, whoever becomes chair next week.
Well, I'm gonna try. So the plan right now, I don't know who the chair is going to be, so I can't very well book them. But we are not. We started doing a new episode of the show on Fridays with Chad Oban. We're actually going to push that to Monday this time because we're going to have Kelly Armstrong on, former chair of the party. We're going to talk about a lot of this stuff that's happening in the House of Representatives. I'm sure we'll talk some about what's happening in the North Dakota Republican Party because we'll know by then some of what happened, but that'll be coming up. So no show Friday. Instead, that show will be Monday, and it'll be a little bit later in the day than usual because we'll be recording it at like 3 p.m. We had to kind of work with the congressman's schedule a little bit, but yeah, so that'll be Monday. Look out for that. As for today, thanks for listening. Thanks to the guest, Adam Goldwyn, who was a good sport to come on and have me harangue him. I don't think I harangued him. I thought it was a nice conversation, but it's
good to get out there.
Sharply disagree with him on some things, but maybe that's a given. All right, thanks for listening. We'll talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.